A very good evening to all of you. And today I welcome you to session number 6 of our Saturday interview series. And today we have two very senior editors in conversation, and I hope it will be a very exciting and enriching discussion. All of you can send your questions in the chat box, and I will pass them on to Surya. But in the initial part of the session, we will have them both discussing issues of mutual concern and issues of wider concern to the freelance community of editors. So over to you, Surit.
Murugraj starting instead of Suri. Okay. So even though the teaser says interviewee is Murugraj and the interviewer is Surit, we discussed and decided that it's more of a conversation between the two of us rather than one person grilling me, Surit grilling me. Okay. So I have a question actually for Surit to begin. So Surit and I have been talking to each other for almost 3 years now. First time I met him was in the editors conclave organized in Chennai by Visalakshi. In fact, I have had a brief discussion with him for one of the projects I was managing as part of my full-time job, and he did a sample, and we could not take in Surit. The sample actually did not meet our expectations. In fact, it far exceeded the expectations. For the fear of having, taking him in and managing him, we thought, okay, it's better we manage a project without Surit. Okay, we had a brief discussion then, and then later the opportunity was for me to meet him during the conclave, and he presented on the financial aspects of being a freelancer. Unfortunately, I didn't learn anything since then. Okay, even though there are a lot of points. One thing that I have consistently seen in Surit is the way he tried to manage his freelance business as a process-oriented, workflow-oriented process. Work. This is typically seen with managers who manage teams in e-publishing companies, these typesetting companies. We manage teams, we wanted to have processes so that nothing unexpected happens at any point of time. But this comes up very often with Surit. So that is something that was really interesting to note. And that would be my first question to Surit. Okay. So when or how this process-oriented thinking for a freelancer, because I haven't seen many freelancers who who think in terms of processes and adhering to them. So Surit, did I make my question clear?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Um, so it's again, it's a process. My sense is that until about 2012, I didn't even think about processes, or maybe it was 2010 or so when. So it works like this. I discovered Perfected. I don't know when I discovered it, okay, maybe 2009, 10, 11. And then I realized that here's somebody who's figured out 27 types of error in a document and has figured out a way to fix those errors. And that I found very fascinating because until then I had been fixing all of those errors, but I had not actually thought of designing a process. So I started using that, and since then I've never spent one editorial day without using Perfected. In 2012, I had a full-time job. Now in 2010, I had a very, very, very bad year, which required me in 2011 to take up a full-time job, which started in 2012 January. And around the time I took up the job, I was inundated with work. So from 2012 to 2015, when I still had the job, I was moonlighting. So I had married in 2013 January. Okay, I had owned no furniture. I was trying to build up my savings. I had none at that time. Okay, so I took in all of the work that I had, and if you have that kind of volume, you have to have ways and means of identifying types of error and addressing each type of error at a go. So soon afterwards, I discovered Edit Tools and Editor's Toolkit. And I tried to use it, wasn't particularly successful. It takes a bit of doing, figuring out what it does. And then at my job, I needed to manage a typesetter and also manage one person who was editing for a journal. Now, I didn't have a system or process to do anything. So I had to figure it out. Now, as I was the publications manager there, but I was a glorified copy editor. So initially there was no work, but as soon as people figured out that I was there and I could do some work, from maybe month number 6 onwards, I had more work than I could handle. There were about 28 researchers in that organization, and they were all giving me work. So you have to very quickly figure out what the problems were and do it. So I developed an intuitive way of doing things. And now when I look at Paul Beverly's way, it turns out that because he could code from 2005 onwards, he's been doing pretty much the same things, except that it's far more granular and it's far more tool oriented. And because he can code, and he's very intelligent at coding, and he understands editing as well. So it's fantastic how many tools there are and what kinds of things they can do if you can get your way around them and use them. So I've been training myself to use those. So my workflow basically is to understand the presence and absence of spaces. Are the spaces where they should be? At the is there a full stop? Within, like, the other day I was talking to you about tables. Perfect, it doesn't remove spaces within tables, or at least I don't think it does. So how do you take care of those? Make sure that the words have spaces between them where they should have, where they have hyphens in between them. And a frequent error that I see is that there's a space after a hyphen. So you want to replace a hyphen or before it or on both sides. So Perfected can't change a hyphen to a spaced n dash or a flush n dash or a flush m dash in depending on what kind of error it is. It can only do it all along, or it can tell you where the errors are. You have to manually fix the error. So you have to have neat ways of dealing with things. Then tables aren't treated exactly the same way as you treat the text. Figure captions aren't treated exactly the way table captions are treated. Some journals and clients have a particular way of wanting their titles, the article titles or the book titles to be styled. So you have to have styles for that written down that you can refer to and that you don't have to think about. So the entire effort of my processes have been to eliminate the need for remembering and eliminate the need for thinking. So you look at something, you do it, you move on to the next thing, you run the checks again at the end. And I am a bit paranoid in the sense that I believe that it's very easy to miss things, especially me when I'm working for long hours, and I'm very irritated at the density of the material. So I build in redundancies. So I run Perfected and grammar check, spelling check twice on each part of the document. So I separate the tables and the figures, I separate the references, I check everything twice, and because I use processes, it's very rare that even an extra space is left in a table cell.
If I can interrupt you here.
No, I'm done. Tell me.
Okay, thank you. Because it's hard for me to believe that you forget things. Because I remember noting the other day when we had a session with Yatin about typography and layouts, and you and Yatin were, competing with each other to share resources that are useful for layouts and topography. You listed a lot of materials, not just books, names of the books, but also the names of authors who wrote and possibly more information. In fact, I commented that you are, complementing Yatin's session really well. Is really surprising to know, and that also takes me to think, how is that you are able to recollect a lot of information, because I think law is one profession where the attorneys or lawyers are expected to quote article numbers or section numbers or IPCs whenever they talk about, they argue. I think the next in line could be copy editing, right? If you want to justify a correction to an author or a publisher, you need to explain why. You cannot say, this is how I learned this during my school, or this is how I heard, or this, I think this is correct. You cannot give such justifications. You need to tell which work that you referred, whether it is CMOS or AMA or practical English usage or Fowler's. So you need to be specific about the reference material. So that would be something that I wanted to understand from you.
So there are several questions that you asked actually. One is, how do I remember? So memory is basically about practice, about doing things over and over again. So for instance, my first introduction to styles and style manuals was at TERI, where Mr. Joshi set up the systems, and he trained the people who trained me. Okay, so what is now called communicating in style was basically 120 page or whatever photocopy manual, where for the first time I figured out that there were 32 types of citation for things. So for instance, you had unpublished papers, papers presented at a proceeding that were not published. Okay, how would you style that? Now, it was mind-blowing. It was, cite a book, I understand. Cite a journal paper, I understand. And that's where the story ends, as far as I can imagine. Why would you want to cite a letter somebody wrote to somebody else, and so on? And then, of course, I discovered that you could also cite parliamentary proceedings and start questions in the Lok Sabha, and bills and ordinances and notices in gazettes and so on. But that was my first introduction. Now that became a book. Now I have a copy of the book somewhere, or maybe I don't, but for the past 5 odd years it's been out of print, and it's been a book on my Google Play books. Now it's hard to read on the phone, but it's easy to read on the screen. Okay, and some of the books that he talked about on that presentation, during that presentation, are listed in the references. Okay, and whatever he publishes, I read. Okay, and whatever he refers to in the notes, it's probably a 400-word document that he's publishing, but there'll be 1 or 2 citations. So I file it away in my list of books to read. Some books I read, some books I don't, some books I forget about. But those books in particular that I mentioned, one of them I had spoken to him about maybe 2 years back. That is, I remember Matthew Butterick's practicaltypography.com. I asked him about it, and he said, yes, I do. And there's a book called Mine Trees, Maps and Theorems, which costs €99, and he had reviewed the book. Okay, so that's how I know. There's a book called Not My Type, which is about typing. I don't know if he referred to that. The other books, I don't remember what I quoted the other day, but those are books that we have discussed. Okay, and I am interested in making the information look clear. So if, copy editing is about communicating your ideas, typography is making sure that the communication is impossible to miss on the printed page, on the web page, that the ideas are presented as they should be. the key idea should be at the top. You know, if you need to use italics for emphasis, you will use it. You will use colors, you will use reports. So I don't do journal articles only. A fair bit of the work I do is in reports. Okay, so the key findings need to be processed in 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. If you have the Prime Minister of a country looking at a report, you can't expect him to go through 12,000 words. You need to give him 50 words to work with, or a cabinet secretary or whoever. So a lot of the NGO work is done for minister level people. And at the IG where I used to work, that's basically been the back office of the Planning Commission and the Niti Aayog for, I don't know, 60 years now, 70 years now, I don't know how long, 70 years. So 3/4 of the work they do is for the government department. Now you don't have cabinet secretaries looking at, reading documents. They scan documents for information. So you don't present the information quickly, you can't do it. So that's how I got interested in typography, and I had to also lay out things. So that's when I figured out that you need to lay out pages on your computer, on Word, so that you could figure out which tables can go where and how to resize tables, because the typesetter we were working with is not competent to handle that sort of issues. And you also had to make sure what kind of errors they're going to make, because they didn't know the Greek alphabet. So you had to figure out how to reduce those errors as well. So you have all of these problems, you have to develop processes. And if you're using one book over and over again, while you were talking, asking the question, I was looking to my left at my bookshelf to see if I had the typography books here. I don't. At least I don't see them here. Maybe they are in my bedroom. So it's basically about doing things over and over again. So, if I were to ask you about what style manuals you use, you would be able to name 3 or 2 off the top of your head. You don't have to remember, because you've been doing it all the time. It's part of who you are. Okay, so that's the way it works, I think. And the other thing is that if there is something that I haven't learned from Mr. Joshi directly or indirectly, I have picked it up following the same principles that were taught to me at TERI. And I've had problems that I have not faced at TERI, and I've tried to solve them. So maybe I have a solution, maybe I haven't, but it all starts there. That's the mother lode. That's where it all starts. And the discussions I have with people it's not always obvious, because not all of those discussions happen on the ICF forum. Some are on the phone, some are person to person, in person, with Mr. Joshi, with other people who are interested. That tells me a lot of things. So I look those books up. I buy a lot of books. I even read some of them. For instance, I'm looking at Stylish Academic Writing by Helen Sword right there. Day before yesterday, I saw that she has something called the editor's something or the other, the Writer's Diet.
Writer's Diet.
The Writer's Diet. How can I share my word screen here? Can I?
You can share screen. Now you can share screen.
Video settings.
No, there should be a share screen at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Share screen. Okay, share screen. It's enabled. Now what? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's called the Writer's Diet. Look it up. And there's also a report that I saw, some writing group in Auckland, New Zealand, doing a comparison of the various writing tools available. So they talk about Ginger and Grammarly and Word, spelling of grammar check, and they go into details that, frankly, I wouldn't have considered. So how Word, spelling and grammar checker re-emphasizes the hegemony of a white perspective language. Now, it's very funny from a particular perspective because I went to Jamia Millia Islamia where they didn't actually like this word. Okay, which is a very genuine sort of thinking in the English department. Everybody talks about hegemonies all the time, and they get very, very antsy when they hear the word. But that word never will leave me alone. And there were lots of other discussions. For instance, last night I couldn't sleep as usual, and I saw a post by Krista Bedwin on a guy who, it's on LinkedIn, a guy who's written a paper on how you organize a system of training technical writers. Okay, which was in PDF form, the script format. So on my phone I couldn't read it. I have to read it. Now, talking to you makes me remember. So that is how it works. And if you're thinking about problems all the time and you're experiencing problems all the time, you're also thinking about solutions all the time. Some of the time you actually make time to look up those solutions and do it. I'm not particularly methodical, so this process and method, this is very, very unlike who I am. I've had to consciously develop this sort of practice just to solve my problems. It's not really nature. So memory is really, I mean, it's basically practice. It's not really remember. It's about what you have to give importance to. Okay, it's not what you consider important, but what your work forces you to consider important. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. So there's this journal which has just dumped 22 papers on me to be finished in 16 days. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, one solution, and this is a real solution, is to batch process using ETK and remove certain errors. So you look up what errors that it can resolve and you resolve those errors. Some errors it can resolve, but it can lead to unforeseen and unforeseeable complications. Okay, so you figure out what those are and you don't do them. And then there, of course, you don't want tables to be processed, so you are on the side of caution. So you have to have ways and means of dealing with situations. You tell them beforehand that certain kinds of error we will not be removing. But then, we were talking about comparisons. What are you comparing to what and why are you comparing it? So that sort of error, if it's there, there's no tool on this planet that can help you. You have to read and resolve. Go on, please.
No, I talking about Editor's Toolkit. I was trying to explore that, and I couldn't establish, whether Editor's Toolkit can be used for Word's latest versions because their home page lists Word versions up to 2010. Are you using a version earlier than 2010 or?
No, I'm on 365 or 2019.
But it works well.
I should have Office 365, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's 2019.
Okay.
I have a feeling that you looked at the web page some time back, or you misinterpreted, or you misread. Because as far as I know,
it was not explicit. They explicitly mentioned the earlier versions, but omitted the recent versions. That's why I wasn't sure whether it is.
Okay, it clearly says that it can work on Windows 2019.
Excellent. Okay, then probably
it doesn't ask me. It doesn't tell me that it stops at. It doesn't tell me. That it does Office 365.
Okay, I'll check up. I'll look up. Thank you.
Okay. So I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So when we met about 3 years back, you were pretty happily in that job, pretty happy in that job you're doing, and we were talking about breaking away, doing your own thing, hanging out your own shingle, and everybody talks about it, nobody does it. Okay, you did it. What were you thinking? Why did you think? What made you think to set up your own business? So there are several questions here. You're basically into training, you're not editing anymore. So why business of your own and why training?
Okay. I think this idea to be independent was had been there for a long time. I think earlier as 2008 or 9, I wanted to do freelancing. I think that was also the time I was introduced to Vivek. Okay, Vivek and I had some brief conversations. I think most of them on Facebook. Okay. And
So which year was this?
I think 2008 or 9.
Oh, okay, okay.
Okay. So Vivek encouraged me to become a freelancer, and I had my own fears, okay, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't ready, in fact. And then I moved to after 5 years of setting up the teams, the language team. I was actually recruited for the Trichy office. Trichy is another second-tier city in Tamil Nadu, and Scientific Publishing Services set up a branch there. Okay, so they recruited me to take care of the language editing team there, and I was the first person to go to that language editing team at Trichy. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I went to Trichy, and then I was there for 5.5 years, and set up the language editing teams, and I was the first language editor for the Trichy office, and slowly built the team. And when I left after 5.5 years, the team was around 75 language editors. And I came to TNQ Technologies now. Earlier it is TNQ Books and Journals, and I was recruited as a copy editing manager to manage some of the existing teams, and also I was responsible for some of the new accounts that they are trying to establish. So both these opportunities provided a lot of space for me to work on the training aspects. My father is a teacher. He's a retired headmaster. My mother is a teacher. A couple of my uncles, my grandfather, my grandmother, a lot of teachers. And when my father said I should consider BA English after my 12th standard, I said no. For whatever wrong reasons, I thought BA English is not as good a course as it would be or it should be. And I said, I'll take up BSc Mathematics.
Yeah, you made the right choice.
I did BSc and MSc Mathematics. I joined MPhil. I didn't complete, and that was one part of it. And after I completed my BSc degree, my father said you should go to teaching. He strongly recommended that I take a B.Ed course, Bachelor of Education course. I said no teaching. I wanted to become a corporate person. Okay, but 15 years or even 17 years later, I am teaching English. Okay, I think that brings me to think that I should have heeded to my father 17 years ago.
You are heeding him just 70 years after he said that.
But maybe in a different direction. But I'm listening to him. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that's good. That's good way to look at it. I'm happy now.
Yeah, but No, from the business perspective, that makes for a fascinating story. But from the business perspective,
It was not an easy choice. It was not an easy choice. In fact, for a few years, I was mulling over this choice and then keep postponing it as much as possible. And at some point of time, when you work for corporates, your passion takes a back seat. As I mentioned it somewhere, the cheese that is in front of us in a corporate setup is not the cheese that I wanted to have or we want to have. They are decided by somebody else. At some point of time, it goes on. It goes on well most of the times, but there are days when you come back home realizing that you haven't accomplished anything. Okay, not to sound bombastic about it, but sometimes it is coming home empty-handed. So that gives a lot of serious time for serious thoughts as to what next. And I think that's where around 2012 or 11 I had serious thoughts about becoming an independent freelancing consultant and teaching. The taste of success in SPS and later TNQ gave me a lot of confidence about my teaching. I thought, okay, instead of becoming another freelancer, this is something that has not been much explored, at least in the Indian context. And I thought I should explore that. And the teaching methodologies, the way I taught in the classroom, the training batches, they were well received, giving me more confidence about taking training as my independent freelancing career. In 2016 or 2017, I more or less made up my mind, and financial fears was the only reason that was keeping me from doing that. And my wife and I had a lot of discussions on that. Finally we decided, okay, it's time I do this. It's always a fallback mechanism. You can go back to a company at any point of time again. So there is always a fallback mechanism. But
yeah, sure. I mean, but that's not what you're thinking about. No, I understand that, and I know your wife well, so that's something that can serve as a backup. But that's really not what I'm interested in. What I am interested in is, this passion business is fine. I mean, I wanted to be my own boss in 1996, and I started out, and I made mistakes that can take about 4 hours to explain and discuss. So we're not going to go into that. But turning your passion into a business that pays the bills is, it takes some doing. Okay, what made you think that you could do it? How did you go about doing it?
Oh, okay. That's another interesting point, because I remember from your presentation on the editors conclave about financial safety, having 6 months of finance for. I didn't start with any of those, unfortunately, but at the same time I wanted to do that. So I started balancing editing and training at the same time. That's why it took almost 2 years for me after I came out to launch my first online course. So had there been financial backup, okay, if I had enough savings, I would have launched this course some time back. I don't have any regrets, because I'm never going to save that much. I wouldn't have come out at all if I was waiting for that opportunity. But I came out, I balanced editing so that there is regular income, and training, started working on the training materials. And I always wanted to, I wanted the training to be fun, engaging, and more practice oriented. I remember from my 9th standard when we learned about polynomials. Okay, it was about binomial expressions and how to factorize them. My class teacher, my maths teacher, Mr. V. Srinivasan, he explained how to factorize a binomial, a 2-degree polynomial. And then he kept on writing examples, exercises for us: x square plus 5x plus 6, x square minus 5x plus 6, and so on and so forth. And he kept on writing without turning back and looking at any of us. And we were copying, and our hands, we couldn't cope with the way he was writing. when the bell, class bell finally struck, it was 99 examples on the board. And that is a great, inspiration for me, because after we completed those 99 examples, these factorizing polynomials have never been a problem. If you remember from our school days, that is one of the problems for many of us. Okay, but I realized the practice is one way any difficult thing can be made easy. I wanted to apply that formula into the editing, the trainings that I conducted, whether it is in-house or in here. So that is where I pay a lot of attention to practice. There is a topic, and then I also learned about, deliberate practice somewhere in 2012 or so. And that gave a great perspective about, dividing the larger problem into smaller problems and then focusing on it again and again and again until we master it. Probably those are the two things that helped me design the way my courses are designed. All of them are methodical, smaller chunks with a lot of practice associated with it. So by the end of that, the learner should be able to apply the ideas immediately. And I think those are the times that really helped me design it this way.
Okay, now
Maybe I digressed from where I started. Anyway.
yeah, so we kind of running out of time, but I'll give you 3 minutes to talk about the purpose of the course, the potential clients, and the methods you use. Purpose, potential clients, methods.
Okay.
2 minutes each.
All right. So the course that I have currently launched, which is going to be live in a couple of days, is for people who aspire to become language editors. Okay, that is a very narrow definition. I know that but India is a place, as I mentioned it somewhere, it's above people publishing companies. Language editing as a process, language editing as a team is very common in India. Maybe outside of India, you don't see, people talking about language editing. They talk about copy editing. But here is an opportunity for us to become language editors, find opportunities in these companies. So that is going to be the course. Obviously, the target audience is anybody who wanted to become language editor more specifically, and people who are already language editors. That's another possibility, is that not many companies in India are focusing or paying a lot of attention on the training aspect. Okay? Very few companies in India have dedicated training programs before somebody is becoming a language editor. Okay, so even many of the language editors, many of the copy editors in India currently, they haven't gone through a structured training program, learning and knowing the fundamentals thoroughly, so that they can build on their career. Somebody we classify them as level 1, 2, 3 here. Somebody is a level 1 language editor, they keep on doing the same light level of editing for years together. How to move away from that or step up from that? So this training program will provide opportunities for people who want to understand language editing, from its basic principles. That's number 2. What was the number 3 question?
So basically, I said potential audience, you covered that. Purpose of the course, you covered that. And processes you used. What are the techniques you use to teach? What are the processes you use? So you already said practice oriented. It's very practice oriented. Yes. And it gives you a lot of practice. Is there any other thing that you could tell us? Is there anything else that comes to your mind about your courses that may interest people listening?
Yes, there are a couple of other things that I can say about that course. One is trying to bring in other elements into learning. Like there are a lot of crosswords. At the end of every topic, there will be crossword, and I'm also trying to figure out if I can incorporate puzzles into the learning. For example, whodunit puzzles, in competitive examinations, people are familiar with seating arrangements. So I'm trying to figure out. I have done a couple of practice papers also like that. So the idea will be, for example, there is a production floor. Okay, a language editor is murdered. are 5 other language editors in the room when the murder happened. So the idea is for us to find who murdered it. There is a suicide note, and the only clue that is available is a suicide note. Okay. So when you read the suicide note, you can see that the note is very thorough with respect to certain points, and there are specific mistakes with respect to some other points. For example, let's say subject verb agreement, even the finest points are properly taken care of, but not punctuation. Maybe the serial comma is consistently followed, but there is a problem with using semicolons and commas. So that short piece of suicide note provides typical areas of strength and weakness for a particular person. So studying the suicide note, identifying the areas where that note went well and did not go well, and trying to map that with the people who are already present in the room. The detective has to identify the right person or the murderer. So that is something that I worked on for one of these topics.
Fantastic. It reminds me of an American TV series I saw. The murderer, she wrote a note where she uses the expression shouldn't have.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Except that she puts in two apostrophes
Oh, okay.
between N and T and between T and V.
Okay.
And the detective goes to a linguist and they say that 0.2% of the population would use that second apostrophe. So that immediately narrows down the suspect.
I was inspired by, the blogger from Baltimore Sun,
Yes,
McIntyre, John McIntyre.
John McIntyre.
I followed John McIntyre very closely until he was hired back into the Baltimore Sun newspaper, and he used to write this kind of stories whenever there is a National Grammar Day. Interestingly, National Grammar Day falls on my birthday, so. Okay, so I was inspired by the way he used storytelling to convey that idea, and I thought I should use that in my training program. So this is not hardcore, what is subject, what is verb, and it provides an opportunity for us to think about language, but not from a language, positioning.
Fantastic. I just hope it takes off swimmingly, and I really hope you need more language editors soon. You need to actually hire language editors to trainers, language trainers, so that the demand can be fulfilled. Will this course be live or will it be recorded?
I just made the sample course available for anyone interested, but it is not complete with all these features. But the full course is going to be live on December 1st.
Okay.
So
And this course is how long exactly?
It is a combination of 4 modules. One is a basic grammar module, grammar and usage. And the second one is about using MS Word effectively for editing. Okay. And that is inspired from the MS Word series that is running there parallelly. I'm going to convert that into a standalone course later this month. And that will also be part of this course, because learning to use MS Word is one important thing for editors. So that will be there. And other related topics, like how to deal with publishers, how to deal with authors, when to query them. So information that are related to editing. And finally, there will be a sample editing program, or a mentoring program, if I want to call it that way. So we have created 25 samples, editing samples of various lengths and various complexities. And the learner will go through these 25 samples over a period of a month. So this entire duration for this training will be around 3 months, depending on the pace of the learner. This is a completely online course with support, Zoom support every week. Okay. So By 6 to 8 weeks, we can complete all other modules, but the third month we'll focus on this editing practice. So anybody can complete this in a period of 2.5 months to 3 months.
Okay. Your website is editorsessentials.com.
That's right.
Okay, no apostrophe, no nothing else.
Nothing. But the name has an apostrophe, but
Yeah, obviously, yes.
yeah.
So that's that. Do we have questions? We have about 14 minutes to go.
We can probably look at some of the questions that were asked.
Nothing's common yet. So, do you see a problem with the desire to learn? Do you feel that there are people who don't want to learn as much as maybe earlier people used to?
I don't think so. The learning is also kind of infectious. When there are a lot of learners around us, we are also encouraged to learn. Okay, so ICF is creating that kind of infectious environment nowadays. With a lot of webinars and presentations and other things. There is a lot of learning, and I think this will propel people to understand learning as an important aspect of propelling their career.
Okay. Tell me, considering that publishing is or editing isn't exactly what you want to do if you want to become rich and wealthy, and at the entry level, the salaries aren't what they might be. Is that a constraint for people who want to enter the industry? Is that a people who want to learn the language or editing? And does that bar them from taking up your courses? Or could that be a problem?
I think editing is not a lucrative career at the beginning. Okay, so I think, but I can see a trend. Some of the inquiries that I received about the course recently were from people who were into software development. Okay, they wanted to switch careers, and the one question that I always invariably asked is, the salaries are not going to be commensurate. You might be getting something in the 70s or 80s, thousands of that, but a starting career, especially at the beginning, editing may not offer you that much. But people, some of them, they are ready to do that because they are finding it too demanding. And probably this is also to do about the an individual's interest. Editing pays off in the long run. If I wanted to become rich quickly, editing may not be a career.
Are you targeting corporations, publishing companies, publishing services? You're talking to people who want to become language editors, but are you looking at the other end as well?
Like?
So, for instance, you're talking to people like me who want to start a career in editing. What about the people who need people who can language edit? Are you talking to the publishers? Are you talking to the publishing services? So, success is going to come from connecting these two groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's where the money is, where you can tell people that if you do well, I can maybe get you a job. And you can tell, let's say, a large firm or a small firm that needs so many editors, that we can vet editors for you. These guys are trained, these people are good.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, in the last 2 years, I have been part of training or consulting team for a few companies in Chennai and Bangalore. I offer training, language editing training for either for specific clients based on their feedback. There are a couple of clients who need regular training, and I also train for a couple of companies. Train the freshers, as we call them here in India. when they get into language editing. I design their first level training program, and then I offer training. So for 4 companies in Chennai and Bangalore, I'm currently offering training and consulting services. And after the end of this training, some of these companies have shown interest to absorb editors who successfully complete this training program into their teams. So that is there as an idea. And I haven't gone to that step of, simply offering training who has a potential and is interested, and then connecting them to corporates and, making that as a business model. I haven't worked on that really. I haven't really thought about that well.
Okay, so these firms that you're talking about in Bangalore and Chennai, how did they find you? How did they know that you exist? How did they know that you could maybe meet their needs?
Initially, through people who knew me from my previous organizations. So it's very well known that people move around companies, so they know who has a potential and who can do what. So the first 2 assignments that I got, and still I am doing for almost 2 years now. So they were all from people who knew me personally, and I started supporting their training requirements through weekly sessions or almost daily sessions. And from then on, it's through word of mouth mostly. When I launched the sample lessons a couple of weeks ago, after looking at the website, a couple of companies approached me, but largely it is through word of mouth so far.
Okay, how are you planning to reach these individuals you want to train as language editors, the people who you want to buy your course or invest in your course? What do you think the places to look might be for you? And how are they going to find you?
Okay, so again, a lot of this is through word of mouth. Okay, I have in the first, in fact, I have completed one batch of editors who trained even before this course was launched. Okay, so almost all of them, 8 of them, 7 of them were through common friends. They said somebody is interested in taking language editing as a career. So those were through word of mouth. But currently, I'm taking to social media to advertise not necessarily in terms of the typical advertisement sense, but to announce that there is a course available, so that it's mostly through my Facebook page, ICF forum, and LinkedIn.
All right. So you use both the secret society approach and the here I am.
Yes, it's more of a combination
approach.
It's more of a combination. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So I rely almost exclusively on the secret society approach. I mean, everybody knows who the friends and family of Shurit Das are. I mean, they know who they are, but nobody else does. I mean, it's practically invisible. I'm not. I mean, I am on social media, but I don't write a lot. I don't announce a lot. I don't. I'm practically not there on social media, except once in a while. But there's some work coming in, and that's because people are talking about the work I'm doing. They're talking to their colleagues. They're talking to their friends, and so on.
Yeah, so, I know you as a person who hops in and out of social media very often.
Yeah, I am basically a phone addict and a computer addict and a social media addict. I'm recovering, actually. I'm a recovering addict. So there was a time when I couldn't breathe if I was more than 5 feet away from my phone, or if I didn't check my social media feed or my email for longer than 60 seconds at a time. I'd have trouble thinking. But what I've been doing since then is that I switch off the phone at night. I switch off the phone when I'm working. I tried about 3 times to get off Facebook. Once I stayed away for almost 3 months. So I'm trying to limit all of that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happening. Okay, you can't keep up with all of it, and there's no point in trying. So whenever you want to, just take a look. If there's something interesting, take a look. Remember what you remember. Practice it. This business of keeping in touch with all of what is happening is not possible. Better to do one thing. I mean, read one thing a month and practice it. So I'm basically trying to practice that. So I've been trying to move away from all of this madness, so to speak. Yeah, there don't seem to be other questions.
Okay, so
We could talk about other stuff. So
I think there are a couple of
yeah, we've covered all of that actually.
okay. One was for you, marketing a business. I think Dola has asked.
Yeah, we covered that.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Yeah, I've not mentioned
Okay, okay.
people who asked the questions, but I've asked the questions on their behalf.
All right, all right. Excellent.
Yeah. So tell me, tell me about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You've talked about it, but what are the basic processes you put in place? So I'll talk about me. I'll talk about myself. So I had known in 2012 that the contract would go away in 2015 March on 31st, and I was pretty certain that the contract would not be renewed. And I knew this from November 2012. So I had been planning all along. I was squirreling away money as much as I could. And even then, because I didn't have a job, again, I had been married a little over 2 years at that time, I was terrified. But again, work came in sometime around January. I mean, work was literally a tsunami of work. And it was insane. And then it just continued. And then what happened is that just to get them from, get it to stop, get that tidal wave to stop, I had to raise my rates. I mean, I literally had to raise my rates to get it to stop. I didn't know how to say no. How do you turn away work? You don't. At least at that time, I couldn't turn it away with and feel no guilt or sense of irresponsibility. So, but if you raise your rates and people don't agree to your rates, what can you do? Okay, so I found myself into doing that, and the rates went up. Some people went away, some other people came in. I raised the rates. The same thing happened, and then I started complaining about how everything was episodic. Okay, so Murugaraj would have a job that would give me some money, and then he would go away, not to be heard from for the next 3 years. Somebody else would come in. There was no predictability to it, so I wanted predictability, and then I got predictability. And what I didn't get was a very high rate. So one problem goes away, two others come in their place. So now you have volumes that are predictable, money that is predictable, but the volumes that have come in, when they come in, it's so much that I'm struggling to develop processes and so on. So you probably don't have that problem. You probably have over the past 15 years developed your own systems and processes to deal with things. Have you thought about coaching other individual copy editors in thinking in terms of systems and processes?
I vaguely remember a similar question from you sometime back.
Oh, I've been asking you this question in various ways for the past year.
I think see the various organizations in Europe or the West, they talk a lot about freelance as a business. What are the other skills and other skills basically that are needed for a freelance business to stay afloat all the time? Okay, but I think we need to start looking at that perspective. I'm talking from an Indian perspective. I haven't answered your question about me doing that yet. Because, see, one thing is doing a job and then doing a job well. Okay. And MS Word is the course on MS Word is probably a partial answer to that. Okay, it is not basically language editing. It is not about editing, but using a tool effectively so that your editing process becomes effective and quick and more quality oriented. There are a lot of other things like planners, maintaining an Excel. Okay. I have a couple of Excel sheets that have pretty much covers or captures all information that are needed. I can generate reports at any point of time quickly. Generating. I also edit for publishing companies. I mean, not publishing companies. These typesetting companies in Chennai and Bangalore. I have a team of editors who work alongside. So I need to maintain a lot of data. Okay, I need to retrieve information whenever I need it. So a lot of related skills that one has to learn to make a business much more profitable. Okay? Time is money, basically. Okay, I don't want to spend, or nobody should rather spend time in something that can be outsourced to somebody else. When I say outsourced to somebody else, doesn't literally mean outsource it to somebody else. When Excel can easily generate a report, pivot tables, or you can retrieve data using slicing of, there's an option called slicer. So if you can use slicers or dashboards that are available in latest versions of Excel, why are you doing it the hard way? Why are you spending a lot of time in doing that? If you spend 1 hour in generating a report that can be generated in 5 minutes if you effectively organize the data, then you are saving 55 minutes of your editing time, which you are good at, which you will be paid better. Probably you are not paid for generating data at all. You will be paid for editing 5 pages or 10 pages. So what are the various ways with which you can increase your editing time, decrease your waste, as we call it in corporate? Okay. So for example, I need to generate data for, I need to generate invoices for these companies that I work for. Okay. We edited around 100 or 120 articles. So I need to talk about all the articles, when it came, when it was delivered, how many pages, all this information I need to supply. So if my data is organized, I have a clear table. Excel has a great option called tables. Okay, it does a lot of things that you need to do yourself. To organize data, retrieving reports is just a cakewalk. You generate reports the way you want it. In fact, at some point of time, I learned Excel VBA to create a system to monitor my team, because as I said earlier, that was a team that I created from 0 editors to 70 editors. So I need to create everything that is related. There were mechanisms to track productivity and others for other teams, but not for language editing. So I need to come up with Excel sheets that, in fact, there was a productivity sheet, there is a planner, and then there is a report generation activity. So I need to combine all three things together. At some point of time, all these Excel formula were not handy. I need to go beyond Excel formula. I consider myself good at Excel formula. I may be somewhere between intermediate to advanced, somewhere like that. At some point in time, I realize these Excel formulas are not adequate. I need to move on to VBA. So I learned to VBA. There is a wonderful site called chandu.org, CHANDOO.org, and that offers a lot of free and paid resources. In fact, I learned most of them for free from that site. And at some point, when I wanted a structured way of learning, I enrolled into their VBA learning program. So I learned VBA, and I created systems for tracking and creating data tables. So yeah, that's right, chandu.org. So these are all things. At some point of time, I was sitting in front of my system, generating reports for 3 hours, which should have been, or which could have been generated in 3 minutes. So I think that's exactly what I mean by using or outsourcing to others. It could be systems, it could be people.
So we're both basically saying the same thing, right? I mean, devising a system or a process that helps you get work done faster. And by work, it's not only editing work, but also associated work. Now, sometimes it's more efficient to outsource to somebody, sometimes it's more efficient to do it yourself. But the principle here is how much work in real terms is being done per unit of time, as opposed to how much effort is going in per unit of time.
That's true. In fact,
So,
that's why I was surprised surprised when you talked about process and other things as an individual freelancer, because I knew that that's the best way to do. Okay, that's one. Another thing is that we do not normally ask this question very often. The question is, there should be, or is there a way to do this better than how I am doing currently? Again, my learning Excel is a great example for that matter. Whenever I had a question, I asked whether I can achieve this using formula. And I started looking for...
The way I phrase it is, instead of looking it as a problem, can you look at it as a problem type?
Type, yeah.
A sort of problem that is going to recur and will recur.
That's exactly right.
It's basically the same thing we're talking about, using very different words.
That terminology, yeah.
Yeah. All right, then we're 7 minutes past 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And since there are no other questions, thank you very much again for agreeing to this. And I've had a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and we'll continue this conversation later on.
Of course, it has always been a pleasure talking to Surit. In fact, time and a clock stops when I talk to Surit.
yeah, I stopped the clock for you. Yeah.
Okay, so it was always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you, Vivek, and all the members who are part of this conversation for being so patient and listening to us for more than an hour. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks Surit and thanks Murugaraj. And I think some of the topics that Murugaraj mentioned, we can probably have sessions on them during our Sunday webinars, because this particular skill set I think is missing, and the Indian freelancers need to develop themselves on these lines, and these can also be like potential business opportunities for you later on, like with some of which you are already doing with a lot of companies. And tomorrow at 11 a.m. we will have the webinar on references. So Surit, if you want to find out why unpublished conferences and letters, those need to be cited or how to cite them, you can attend it, because he will be talking about styling in terms of the different components, which component is important and how much importance each component has. And once we know the principles, it doesn't matter like which style we follow. So I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow, and have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to check if we can have a demo of chandu.org sometime.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, Divya. That's what I mentioned. Na, like we will take up some of the things that he had mentioned in the later sessions.
So
because
I gave words to that thing so that we don't forget it.
Something practical is always better when we see it happening. Just like we had the session on find and replace. So we will certainly have a session on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone. Have a nice day.